This is Progzilla Radio, the UK's first dedicated progressive rock music radio network.
You're listening to Tabletop Genesis, a podcast by Genesis fans for Genesis fans. Hello everyone, this is Mike Lord.
Oh, hello, this is Simon.
This is Stacy.
This is Tom.
And you're listening to Tabletop Genesis. Thank you all for being here today. We have a very special thing for you today. It's our interview with Tony Banks.
He's our very special thing.
Yes. Yes, I'm very articulate today, so we just had some sugar, so we're all a little bit wired. But yes, I want to thank, right at the top of the episode, I want to thank Joe Greenwood with Tony Smith Personal Management for setting this up for us. Now, I was doing a vacation over in London and was able to set this up and talked with Tony out at the Farm Studios, where a lot of Genesis history happened. And we talked mainly about his solo career. I really wanted to focus on that, much like we did with Ant Phillips the year before. And, of course, Genesis comes up as part of that conversation, but be prepared to hear a lot about Tony's solo career and solo albums, which you may not know much even if you own the records. So we will now jump into the interview with Mr. Tony Banks. Hi there, this is Mike Lord, and we are at the Farm Studios talking to Tony Banks.
Good day.
Good day, good morning, whatever whenever you're listening to this. So, Tony, thank you for coming out here. We really appreciate it. I wanted to talk about your career in music and your solo career specifically in the classical albums you've been doing most recently. But to start off things, what's your earliest musical memory from your childhood? Is there something that you recall that kind of really sparked your interest in music back in the day?
Well, music was very much a part of my childhood. My mother was very musical. She used to play the piano all the time. And I suppose that it's different what the earliest ones were. I remember we had, everything in those days was on 78s,
Sure.
So going back a bit in time here. And so, you had version of, say, we had Rachmaninoff's, I think, second piano concerto was on, but it was on 24 records, so you never really got through the whole thing, however hard you tried.
Right.
And there was a version of Ravel's Bolero that was just two sides of a 78, which I used to love, so it's a compact version of Bolero, which is, of course, misses half the point of Bolero, in fact. But so those sort of things, a lot of show tunes, particularly Rodgers and Hammerstein, which I've always loved, and that was much part of my, childhood.
Sure. So the classical music was really kind of the start of your musical life, and now you've been doing the past 3 albums that you've put out have been all orchestral classical albums. What can you describe the writing process for your orchestral albums?
Well, the process isn't that dissimilar from what I did for the other albums and everything. It's just that you're less conscious of trying to make a shape. You're not trying to sort of get verses and choruses and stuff. So you avoid repetition. It's almost not a conscious thing. You just let things develop more. And I like when I come back to things to sort of do variations and not to repeat identically what I've done before and stuff. And obviously length is the thing. I mean, if Genesis did long songs, I think probably that was more me than anyone else. So
Sure.
I love things that ramble around the place. And when we did things like Supper's Ready or Musical Box or whatever, which went through a series of changes, I always said, and I think it's absolutely right, that each bit sounds better because of its contrast with the previous bit. So you have a loud bit against a soft bit and all that. And I like doing that with music. And, and I've always loved classical music. I was finding the rock albums were getting a little bit, wasn't commercially they weren't very successful, and I was very happy with them as pieces of music, and I almost did it as a sort of final thing. I thought back in 2000, I thought that is this it? Because that's calling all stations thing had done okay, but not brilliantly. And I thought, well, perhaps it's time, 50, time to retire and do something else, And I thought, but I'd always wanted to do an album of orchestral music ever since I'd done The Wicked Lady with Michael Winner, where a fairly simple theme had been transformed into something much greater. Working with an arranger in that case, definitely, who added a lot to it, I think. And so, doing Seven, which was the first of these orchestral albums, was very much, just seeing how it would work.
Right.
And I wasn't sure. I had a few bits around that I thought could work in that format, but I wasn't totally sure. And I just started writing, and the piece I wrote that really convinced me was the piece that ended up on the record called Black Down, which I just wrote on a string synthesizer, just playing it. It was pretty, and obviously we've embellished it a bit since, but the first 2 or 3 minutes is pretty much exactly what I played. That made me think this is worth doing, because that's good. That's, to me, is genuinely in the orchestral world. It's not like trying to take a piece of rock or middle of the road music and trying to make it classical. This was actually genuine classical music, so that set me off, and then built the rest of the album around it. And it was the sort of first time since A Curious Feeling, I suppose, that I'd had any kind of real response back from an audience that was positive.
Well, that's always a good thing to have.
I like
that
positive response.
Exactly.
I'm very fickle, very shallow.
You respond positively to positive response.
Sound great. I think
it is. I've enjoyed each of the classical albums, and I think I've enjoyed each of them more than the last.
Right.
Because in some ways, I feel like that the writing on 7 and then 6 and 5 begins to sound more like you. It sounds more like some of your personalities coming through the music.
Yeah, I think there's very much there in all of them, particularly, obviously. I think on 7 was very much me. 6, obviously, working with Paul Englishby, who's a fantastic musician himself. Perhaps some of his interpretations took it slightly further away from the demos than I might have wanted, whereas 7, some of it was quite close. But on this one, that was a reason for doing this final one the way I have. Where I kind of used my demos very much as a template, and I said all this on the liner notes for anyone who knows me. But I kind of I wanted to try and get what I saw as close as possible, my original vision, and do it. And working with Nick Ingman, who kind of really saw that as well, and was able to to help me and embellish and add, but nevertheless stick very much to the structure I had. We used my original demos as the template. My piano part was stayed right through, the one I originally did, and just about all the parts I did are there, and then there's little bits of weaving in and out and doing extra stuff and fiddling about a bit to make it work, particularly on the percussion area, which I was a bit lazy with. So for me, I actually think that I also thought my writing was probably almost best on the final one as well. So particularly the opening piece, Prelude to a Million Years. it's which I wrote originally for a music festival over here in England, which was performed there and was a bit iffy. It was all right, some parts were all right. So I kind of revisited it and fiddled around a bit, and I really thought that was a really strong piece of music to me, And then the other pieces, again, I felt very positive about them. And I said I love Black Down from Seven. It's kind of has a special place in my heart.
Sure.
But other than that, I feel virtually all of this record has better pieces on it than the others. It's one of those things. I mean, I think you probably get better at it. I suppose you get more used to, understand a little bit more what orchestral instruments can do. But you are a bit dependent on. Arrangers obviously have some effect on the character, and I felt that Nick was very good at kind of subliminating is that the right word? I don't know, his character to mine in this, and nevertheless doing a fantastic job.
Right. They almost have to be invisible, but in some ways the arranger's going to have a stamp on the material.
Yeah, they are. And I think with Paul, he had more of a stamp, and although I liked very much what he did, he particularly affected the two solo pieces, the Siren and Blade, the two solo pieces, and I think what he did was fantastic. And particularly improved, I think, the Siren.
Mm-hmm.
Blade is kind of different, a little bit different what I had originally, and what I had was actually even faster and a bit more rhythmic, perhaps, a little more consistent with the rhythms. But the other pieces, they were more pretty much like I intended them to be, so I wasn't so worried about that. But it's it's one of those things, really. I sort of. I just thought perhaps if I was going to try and do it the way I was talking about, that someone like Nick, who's very experienced working with, he's worked a lot in pop music and done arrangements, and is also very used to this idea of recording things piecemeal, because I did this very much with recorded the strings and then the brass and recorded the flute and all that, rather than recording the whole orchestra in one, which where you don't have a chance to scrutinise. You very much have to do it, hope to get a good performance and see what happens.
Did you get pushback from the orchestral world about recording things separately, because again that's not the norm generally? So was that something that you had to convince
I don't
the
have to
orchestra?
convince. I don't have to convince the orchestra, because the orchestra we use one in Prague, they do a lot of work with in film and stuff, and so they're very used to doing this kind of thing. And Nick obviously has done a lot of work like this. I think the people who I was very up and front and honest about this when I did obviously I said on the liner notes and everything, and I think some of the people in the classical world, of course, don't like this at all. They don't really like what I do anyhow, from the point of view that mainly because it's recording before it's a performance.
Sure.
And the classical world is very much you perform the thing and then you record it. And there's always a prejudice against people from rock and roll doing classical music. It doesn't matter what I'm in a classical world. And I call it orchestral because it's not classical.
Sure.
So it falls into this terrible sort of what they call crossover. And I don't think it's any more crossover than some parts of Paul Williams or something, really, but it's just that people want a category for it. And so that's where it ends up.
Right. It's easy people want to put music into a box.
Well, that's right,
If it's...
Well, we struggled with this a bit as Genesis over the years, and I was quite sure, particularly when we sort of did what you might call slightly more accessible things, suddenly we're a pop group, not a rock group, and when we got nominated for various Grammys, I think it was at the time of probably We Can't Dance or something, everything was in the pop thing.
Right.
And I thought, well, the trouble is we have one or two pop songs, but we also have our strength in many ways. There's always been those more ambitious pieces. I mean, I know we've had hits with things, I'm very proud of things like Land of Confusion and everything, but, the things like Tonight or whatever, or Driving the Last Spike are kind of not, they're much more involved.
Right. Those aren't the radio tracks that get
played.
They're
not the radio tracks, not ones that get played, and therefore when the album is therefore considered a different way, and you find you're competing with Beyonce rather than U2, and that's sort of, we're never going to win that fight.
Sure. So can you talk through the 5 tracks on 5 at this point, because it starts out, as you said, with Prelude to a Million Years, which, as a listener, for me, it's interesting because it's about a 15-minute track, and the themes are very similar, and so I really had to listen closely to kind of figure out what was happening in the track. And also, I'm not as familiar with listening to orchestral music as I am to more kind of the rock world or even some jazz in there. So it's an interesting listening experience as an audience member to say, oh, what am I listening for here?
Well, you've got really two major sort of aspects to it. One is what is the opening part, which goes in the middle and at the end sort of as well, which is sort of slow. theme, which I suppose recalls Watch of the Skies, all that kind of stuff, a bit. Like just chords that move and sort of hopefully move you, in a way, and then set it up. And then the sort of second part, which is sort of more the arpeggio sort of parts, where I kind of have a sort of a theme suggested a lot of times, and then I do it in its kind of what you might call its proper form in the middle and then twice at the end, I suppose, which is sort of fairly traditional format in a way. But it's, I don't know, I just kind of was trying to sort of, what I wanted with this piece in many ways was what I tried to do on the final piece on 6, which was to kind of have, I wanted the arpeggios to keep on going, so that I originally called this piece arpeggio, or arpeggio at least, because I wanted to try and make certain that everyone knew that that's what I was trying to do, that to keep the arpeggio going all the way through, and it's sort of there in the background doing something that's either played by the piano or it's played by the harp or played by the flutes and stuff, Yeah, that was the sort of idea. I love the sort of motion that has, which perhaps is not a terribly classical thing. It's sort of like more filmic, I suppose. Think of John Barry and people like that who tend to do a lot of that kind of stuff. But I kind of wanted that, and that's why I called it that. So I want to make certain that when I originally started the arrangements, possibly with Paul, I wanted him to know that's what I was trying for. And then obviously, I changed to using with Nick. It was more obvious what I was doing. Use the part. So it's a kind of. I hope it's sort of uplifting. I mean, I just think the theme. Is very, I think the main theme is very strong. I think the introduction is very strong. And then I think it's 15 minutes long, which means that, of course, no radio station will ever play it. This is the big problem.
Sure, right.
And I think even Spotify and people have trouble with big tracks. There's always this question of how they do these things. So, no one hears it unless they buy the record, which is unfortunate. But that's. Proud of it, so.
Right, and Reveille is it the cornet that takes the lead melody?
Yeah, the cornet. Well, I did it as a that was what I had on the demo. It was many ways. I've written this sort of fast sort of piano thing where I'd cross my hands, which I've done many times over the years from the Lamb Son onwards, and it sets up quite a nice rhythmic feel, which I always like. And I just was sort of bluesing around on top with sounds that I had on my computer, and one sound I had which was very nice was this cornet sound, and I found it gave it a sort of real bounce and a sort of could play kind of cornet type lines, and I felt it sounded interesting. Had sort of two in that. You've got two related themes. You've got the fast theme and then the slower theme, which has got a related melody, but done as a sort of very kind of more, perhaps slightly more traditional Tony Banks kind of soft piece, really. It's one of those pieces. I mean, I think that it's in many ways my least favourite of the five. I have to say, although it's the only one that never got any radio play, I have to say, because it's short. I think shorter. I think it's, and I just still like it. I do enjoy it, but it's just it was good as a contrast after the sort of slow, feel of the first one. Suddenly you have this sort of faster, more exciting piece, really. And I think it's, I'm pretty happy with it. But
it's one that I thought would translate to kind of a rock arrangement.
Well, you could do it. You could do it with drums. Yeah, you could do the whole thing. But you could do that. I think that's, you said before, perhaps was coming closer to Tony Banks somehow. This particular album, I think. I do think it has sort of more prog elements in it, perhaps, than some of the other ones did, because I did it with my demos, and therefore, although I used clicks, but very variable clicks, to be honest, but it does nevertheless tie it. And this one particular one has quite a strong tempo thing in it, so you could imagine drummers playing along with it and everything would sound great. Right. If anyone wants to do it, they're welcome.
Right. So then we've come to Ebb and Flow, the fifth track, which... Third. Sorry. I have 5 on the brain here.
Don't be worried.
Yes.
You're 5 on the brain's good, you know. Yeah, well, this was actually when I did the original piece, the first piece, the Prelude wrote it for the music festival. I had this other piece, sort of bits and pieces on the go as well, which is Ebb and Flow, and I wasn't sure which I was going to do for it. This is, again, really involves 2 separate kind of ideas. One which is just hinted at the beginning, and that's embellished as you go through the piece until the final minute or two, where it's actually played in its entirety. Sort of slow and quite sort of epic sort of theme, and then a sort of faster, more breezy piece that's in the middle, which has sort of sax soloing on top of it, which is Martin Robertson, who's the same chap who played the sax on the previous, on 6 at least. And you know, again, it's just where it takes you. You sort of fiddle around, you do ideas. Had a sort of quite a nice way of playing the piano, where the 2 parts were playing very much in the same register. And that sort of led to ideas, and again, just playing around on top with the melody line, improvising, if you like, to produce the sax lines. I sort of, that's in a sense how I used to do a lot of the Genesis things when I was doing things like Cinema Show or whatever. You know, you'd just have a backing, and then you'd kind of just improvise on top and see what happened, and then try and arrange the improvisation so that they made sense. And that's a bit like what I was doing on this one, I suppose.
Right, find what works and kind of move forward.
Yeah,
with
some
that.
things work, and you're trying to sort of perhaps elaborate a little bit on the basic melody each time and go a little bit further with it. And as I said, but the other theme was more a sort of stricter, more straightforward kind of melody, which sort of, you know, finally has a couple of chords in the final rendition, which should kind of make you feel it's all worthwhile.
So with Autumn Sonata, the 4th track, is you mentioned and you mentioned in the liner notes that it's based upon, has kind of an older piece that never found a home for it in other material. How old was that?
Oh, it's not that
piece?
old, really. It was only, again, about 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
It wasn't a very old piece.
Okay.
It was just, I called it New and Old because when it was working title, which is pretty unimaginative. But I had this sort of stuff which starts which is in the middle, really, starts with a little flute phrase and then goes into the another cornet part, really, and then quite a rhythmic thing that almost is a sort of uses a very sort of standard kind of note pattern from rock music, almost, you know, almost like a 12-bar sort of start, you know, everything. And I just sort of like that in the context of classical and using all the classical percussion, marimbas and glockenspiel and stuff, you know, to get a certain kind of effect. The early part and the later part, which I wrote later on, I just had an idea. I wanted to try and write a melody just on 2 chords, and I almost managed it. And I actually introduced a 3rd chord, and then when I played it, did a rendition, a 2nd rendition, I couldn't stop myself embellishing it with all sorts of other chords and stuff, you know. I can't stop myself. It's that kind of...
Well, that's what people listen to your music.
Well, I know
for,
they do,
right?
but I just wanted to see. I had 2 chords because I remember that the one I did, the Wicked Lady, was 2 or 3 chords, and I thought it really worked well. You know.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's sort of keeping kind of simple melody, and then of course what ended up as the end of the middle part also ends up as the end of the piece as well in a way, sort of like, which is much more dramatic. But again, kind of not, you know, whereas something like Arpeggio, the first one, Prelude, uses lots of kind of slightly strange chord sequences and everything. This is kind of a fairly standard descending bass line chord sequence, but kind of epic thing, and just with everything going nuts on top, which I quite enjoyed, sort of having the strings arpeggiating like mad, and the brass trumpeter trying to sort of play above the whole thing, you know.
Right.
And so it was a kind of, trying to keep the whole thing a little bit more kind of within much more conventional harmony and everything, rather than sort of faffing around like I normally do.
And with the final track, Renaissance, again, you mentioned in the liner notes that it might kind of harken back to your prior past in progressive rock. And it's interesting because I actually thought one or two of the other tracks sounded more like that world than the final one. Just, again, as a listener, I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, well, that may be the way. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I was talking about sort of avoiding unconventional harmony a bit in the previous one. Obviously, in this one, I go the other way, and I use a lot of kind of slightly stranger changes and everything. The reason I started off, I had a piece when I was back in the days when I was trying to write in the film world, back in the late 90s. I did lots of demos and bits and pieces and things. So there's a little piece I had that, in fact, I don't think anyone was never sort of thought of even. I don't think I ever gave it to anyone or anything. And I just was playing some old tapes, seeing if anything inspired. And I had this little, I thought, that's really interesting, sort of little kind of a line on top of these, bass note line, and then this chord coming in, and then this little very simple melody afterwards. And I thought that's a great start point. So I kind of used that, and then sort of saw where it led me. And it's kind of, I sort of think it's the reason I think it's more prog than anything. And particularly the final sequence when I actually have a sort of a 1 second silence in this, which is unusual for me. I don't have enough silences. I know that. Everything goes on, and then comes in with what was pretty much a piano-led piece, to start with, anyhow, which could have been a piece of rock music, definitely.
Right.
But it's kind of like I think for me it's a really strong, from one of the strongest melodies I've ever written. I feel, I really love it, and it's sort of like very much kind of going off into the sunset, optimistic thing. So that was why it was the end piece. I mean, it have to be said that the final piece is my favourite of them all, really.
Okay.
And it's a little bit, it's more unusual. It's more. That's the reason it's more Tony Banks. The starting point is a bit more Hark Sakura's feeling, sort of type feeling slightly, and everything. And then the second half is more sort of in the rock idiom where I've kind of been, but still I think works as a classical piece, and kind of sort of let the chords take me a little bit where they would. very pleased with the record. I still like it. Sometimes when you come back to these things, you think, oh, I don't know, I'm not sure. You go through on and off things over the years, and you think. But this one I still like, and it's a long time since I recorded it now because we finished it. It's about a year and a half since I finished it.
So it feels almost in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, I mean, I can judge it now a little bit more sort of thing. It's also did what it was going to do in terms of sales and charts, I suppose. So you then have a chance to sort of review a little bit. What do you think of this? Because I've often been frustrated in the past where I feel I've done something really good, like I thought when I did Still, for example, and it had a chance of being a hit. And of course, it wasn't. And you get frustrated, and you listen back to it, and think, well, you then start to doubt some pieces more than you might do if it had been a big hit.
Right. It's easier to. If people buy it in large numbers, it's easier to say, "Oh yeah, that was good."
Well, that's right. I mean, I felt the same about many Genesis albums, whereas some bits, I think, so I can review dispassionately. I think so. I think there's some good moments and bad moments on everything one does. It's bound to be, and it doesn't necessarily relate to sort of sales or anything else. I mean, we all know that it's so much a matter of visibility. I mean, and people will say this from everybody who's ever recorded or written a piece of music in their lives know that they say if only people could hear it, they'd love it. Right. And if you don't think that, there's no point in doing it in the first place. So I think that just as much as anybody else does, And the guy in his bedroom, I'm sure, is thinking exactly the same thing when he puts something down on tape and thinks, this is fantastic, I just wish people could hear it. And he may well be right, And there's a lot of dross in the pop charts, and a lot of it gets through where it is because of the personalities of the people involved and the interest people will have in those as artists. You hear a very mediocre piece of music, but done by someone who's a name. Right. And it's a sale because people like the person. They like to hear them sing something, even if it's not that great.
I know as a listener for myself, my entryway into your music was through Genesis, and as a completist, as I am kind of a...
we love people like you.
Yes, I and for a while in the US, it was very hard to find some of your solo albums.
Definitely. It's quite hard over here, too.
Yes. but it was, I think, when I found A Curious Feeling in The Fugitive, I mean, were the two out when I was getting into this in the mid to late 80s. And those albums, to me, I was like, there's really good stuff on here. I really enjoyed both of those. And can you talk a bit about... I mean, segueing out of the classical world and back into those rock albums, kind of how those two kind of, started your solo career.
Well, A Curious Feeling was the period I was writing a lot of stuff in the late 70s, and obviously a lot of ended up on Trespass, not Trespass, Track of the Tail, and Wind and Wuthering in particular. And and I kind of, and then there were those three albums, I suppose, a lot of stuff, and I just had a load of stuff, but I had this idea, I had this piece that was originally written as an introduction to the song Undertow, which, it didn't get used because the other boys thought that I had quite enough introductions going, cul-de-sac and all the rest of it, and so I sort of shelved it in a way, and then when I was asked to do, Mike and I were asked to do the theme to the film called The Shout, I sort of resurrected this bit, but I completely transformed it in the sense what was the original big bit, the main bit. I made it just played once in the middle and used what was a kind of just a spooky kind of interlude, if you like, between two bits, and made that the main part because I thought it had a sort of atmosphere that was kind of made you feel slightly uneasy and would work well with the film. And so I did that, and I thought that the piece of music worked really well. It wasn't used that well in the film, I don't think. It could have been used better. It was a bit kind of got drowned out by wind noise and stuff, which just irritated me a lot. But it's, so I thought this piece is good. I want to use it. I thought it was a great starting point for an idea. And for me, A Curious Feeling was it's one of my favourite things I've ever done as a writer. I mean, obviously playing-wise, we've done far better things just because of the players involved and everything, but it's... I was really pleased with particularly the musical side of it. I mean, things, like The Waters of Lethe, I thought was just a lovely piece of music, which I think could work orchestrally if you wanted to. And I just thought the idea, although I originally wrote it based around the story Flowers for Algernon, which is a favourite science fiction story of mine, where it has a sort of same sort of cycle as I did. I won't bother to go into the Flowers for Algernon plot, but I had to get something which did the same thing, where a person would start off one way and end up having becoming something completely different, and then at the end ending up being how he was at the beginning, if you like. And that, because I thought it was sort of a tragedy aspect of it I love, and I thought my music always lends itself to being sad a bit, with a happy tinge,
Yes.
sort of nostalgia and everything. So I enjoyed that very much. I mean, some of the lyrics ended up being a little bit wordy for that, trying to do that. I think the original Flowers for Algernon was actually easier to write. But some of the pieces kept pretty much the same lyric, like the song You, and For a While.
I was going to bring up You because that's one of my favorite tracks on the album, and I think it kind of proves wrong the myth that you all couldn't write love lyrics in some ways.
Well, it was a funny old thing, really, because when we in the early days we came out of what we call public schools here, which are very repressed kind of institutions, and none of us could write about relationships at all. So we wrote about Roman myths and all the rest of it, which was fun. I mean, to write stories was great. To not write about love was quite good. And then when we got to And Then There Were Three, I think we were sort of trying to get a little bit more kind of confident in terms of being able to actually write about real things. And so I wrote the song Many Too Many, which was about love gone wrong, if you like, which I found easier to write than love gone right. Mike was in a very romantic mood, so he wrote the lyrics to Follow You, Follow Me, which obviously was a group song, but it has a very straightforward, positive sort of view on love. And I suppose that kind of opened the floodgates a bit, really. And I mean, I've written a lot of songs relating to relationships since then, I suppose, normally going wrong, but You was one where it sort of where it was good.
How strange, I never noticed your eyes are the color of your hair. It seems to me you grow more beautiful in every way, with every single passing day.
But we kind of knew it was going to go wrong, you see, that's the point. So
it
that's
was going wrong in the future.
In the
some
future,
way,
that's
so.
right.
And there's a great keyboard solo in it.
Yeah, well, that
also,
was fun
so
to do. Actually, all I did was I just set up a sort of basis as if like Mike was playing a rhythm part, and I just a couple of nice chords and all the rest of it, and then just improvised on top to see what would happen really a bit. When I did cinema show, a lot of Mike Wood sort of had originally started off as sort of like a chord thing, and then when I played on top of it and then tried to take the chords somewhere else, but he had two basic chord sequences on that 7/8 rhythm, which kind of I was able to use as a sort of a great starting point, and I wanted to get a similar kind of thing going on this. So it is a bit Genesis-y really in a way, that final part, but I thought it was, I was quite pleased with the solo.
Talking about lyrics a bit, obviously being a piano player, keyboardist, that's kind of your main tool for writing, but when did you start writing lyrics?
Well, we did right at the beginning, really. I think it was just a matter of, I wasn't too sure I wanted to write lyrics, but I found I did. I sort of, even on Genesis Revelation, one or two, I tended to write a little.
Which one's on there, do you remember?
Well, I wrote, the Far Side song, I suppose, was more me, and there was, Ant used to be quite involved with all these things. There was a song that didn't end up in there called The Shepherd, which was me and Ant, really. Ant was always a bit more kind of in the world of fairies. If you know, I mean, he was a great lyrics poet, but he was more fond of fairies than me, so a bit of that crept in there. But I'm trying to think what other ones. So I mean, Peter probably from that stage was writing more of the lyrics, I suppose. I don't know. He had to sing the bloody things for a start, and I mean. And some things we kind of collaborative things a little bit. You sort of people came up with different ideas on the songs. I think when it came to sort of Trespass, it's kind of sharing the workload a bit. Really, we all kind of wanted to contribute, and in particular, he liked to write lyrics. Mm-hmm. So he wrote things, obviously the lyric to Visions of Angels and stuff like that. I think Peter, from the outset, was the best lyric writer. Really wrote the lyrics to The Knife and also to Stagnation, which I thought was a good lyric. So I was happy. I wanted to. The music was what I was really keen on, but I wanted, I'd like to keep my hand in writing lyrics.
And was there competitiveness there also?
No, not really on the lyrics. I think the reason why we always said everybody wrote everything was because we didn't want to get that kind of thing. So, because whatever people may say, I know if you've got the sort of the idea that sort of lyrics and music always share equal billing, but I mean that may be sometimes the case, but I don't think with Genesis music was like that really. I think the lyrics were sometimes very important, but a lot of the time were just the instrument of the singer, and the music was just as important. So you kind of wanted to sort of get away from that thing that you'd 50-50 all the time on that basis. And as when on the next two albums, up to things like Foxtrot Sending and all that, we were all writing lyrics, fairly much around the thing. I think, I wrote the lyrics to things like, with Mike, to Cinema Show and The Fifth, for example, I think Peter always found it more difficult singing other people's lyrics, which is fair enough, I understand that. So when
Singers tend to say that in general.
They do, and when he came to Landline Sign of Broadway, he kind of wanted to write all the lyrics, and he pretty much did, apart from a track or two.
Sure.
Which I think that did become a slight bone of contention because it meant it only had one character. Although I think the lyrics to Lamb are really good, I think the album itself it doesn't, to me, totally work as a totality. I don't think that's necessarily the lyrics, but I think it's the fact that the approach we took on it a little bit. And although I think the first two sides are fantastic and there are great moments throughout, I don't think it, as a four-sided thing, that it works quite as well. Perhaps because the last track or two are not really the strongest tracks, which you needed something really powerful there. And I think that does stem a little bit from having this one character throughout, really. I understood why we did it, and it worked on a basis, and I would have been quite happy to have carried on working with Peter and stuff, because he was great, but it was just, it didn't matter. In a way, when he left, it did open it up a little bit, and then, the rest of us could then, take off a little bit more as lyric writers. I think we became better as lyric writers, all four of us actually. Phil perhaps took until face value before he really started writing great lyrics, I think, but I think, Steve wrote fantastic lyric for Blood on the Rooftops, for example, and these are sort of things we went kind of, I think it was kind of interesting to get different characters from different people.
Sure. Jumping forward from there to The Fugitive, you decided to sing everything on The Fugitive, which I enjoyed. I think it's great to hear somebody sing their own lyrics.
Well, that's one reason I did it. One thing was, I think after The Curious Feeling, there was, and Mike had the exact same problem, so we went through the same process here, that people didn't really know whose album it was.
Right.
And they said Tony Banks, and I remember getting a letter from Pete Townsend saying how much he enjoyed my voice.
Oh, okay.
So, but it wasn't my voice, you see, because Curious Feeling was Kim Beacon. So this was kind of like, I thought, this kind of confusion, I thought, well, let's have a go. I can sing, not very well, I can sing. And I'm sure within a studio situation I can make it so that it works. We didn't have all the tools that later came for the Spice Girls and everything. We actually had to do it and then drop in and try and get it right. But so I did find it was an interesting exercise, what I've been trying to make these guys sing over the years. And I did find I simplified lyrics and melodies quite a bit in order to make them work for me. And I developed a sort of slightly aggressive way of singing rather than my sort of natural, pure tone. Which I enjoyed doing.
Did it give you sympathy for Phil and Peter retroactively?
Particularly Peter. Yeah. Phil's much more adaptable. He could sort of get himself into the part, and I made him sing sort of things that perhaps he was able to, I think, to switch off from the meaning a little bit. Whereas Peter, I think, tried to always get something out of the thing, and if he couldn't, it was sort of a bit, so you get slightly that session singer singing, if you like. sometimes on when a person's singing a lyric that isn't their own, I think. Whereas I felt Phil could always manage to get around that, and I think he sang, lyrics by the rest of us really well, always, actually. I think find it slightly easier to do that. Yeah, so Fugitive, well, I thought it'd be quite fun to try. The trouble is that being a singer on a record and trying to promote it, and then you become the main man. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's totally not me. So I kind of did a couple of videos and things, which was a nightmare. But it was interesting to do because it's sort of,
This Is Love video is a classic
This Is Love, yeah.
of the form, I should say.
Well, in terms of being something people should try and avoid.
Well, let's just say it's a classic and leave it at that. So.
It's not my finest hour, but it was kind of fun to do. It taught me again something about what to do. And then it was interesting because when we originally the Fugitive, that we played it around to people, and Stiff Records over here were interested, which were the people who had Madness, and quite a trendy label at the time, and they were quite excited by the music, I think, and then I went to meet them. I think one meeting with me was quite enough to let them know that this was not going to be the new kind of whatever it was at the time.
Right.
They just decided to drop me, and I went. Fortunately, Tony Stratton-Smith at Charisma Records was very happy to pick me up and everything. Okay. But the record, obviously, that we released, This Is Love, but then perhaps slightly more success, The Wheels Keep Turning. The Wheels Keep Turning, we released an edited form of that. Got a few plays and stuff, but again, nothing happened. So I found, whereas A Curious Feeling had sort of looked like it was going to do really well and then came in quite well at the charts and then went down, was a bit disappointing. This one never did anything, and I was a bit depressed by that. And I thought, well, I won't bother with that again, Right. But as you do, I know you don't want to go through the whole oeuvre, I know, but again, like Mike did Mike and Mechanics, where you managed to take away the emphasis from himself and make it a group.
Right.
And I tried to do the same thing with Bank Statement, of course, and that didn't, again, was not a success, but, I think in some ways it worked quite well in the sense having the different singers and everything. But
there's some great songs on there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's good songs all over the place, which is why I ended up doing the Chord Too Far compilation album. I tried to take what I thought were the best songs from all those records, put them in one place, so that anyone who was interested, who liked Genesis and thought, well, maybe what he's done on his own might be interesting, here's some stuff,
Yeah.
And, it was the trouble of being a sort of 4-disc set or something. It means that puts off quite a few.
I have it right here. It's interesting because you always try to narrow it down to what is the best or what kind of makes sense with each other. And I was actually very happy that it didn't go chronologically through your career. I liked the kind of mix and matching of putting songs next to each other.
Just to take all the pieces and to sort of see what would make it. I also wanted to try and put emphasis on tracks that hadn't had the emphasis before.
Right.
Obviously opened it with the little bit from Quicksilver because I just thought it was a really good piece of music and uplifting. It was just a couple of cents, and then going into At the Edge of Night, which was a song which perhaps got a bit lost on The Fugitive. So you kind of go through this really, and
that one too is a great opening for for the whole set. I thought it was exciting. Well, that's good. Yeah.
It's really good, you know. And
it's a good intro to that song. I'm talking about intros before.
Yeah, well, I thought it set it up quite well. Set up the album. And, you know, it was like sort of. I think it was always good to set things up with a nice intro. You know, you can get along. I've always felt that with Genesis shows. I've always thought those first few moments are so important. You know, and that's why I was so glad on the last tour when we did open with the Behind the Lines introduction. I never thought the song was quite up to the rest of it, but the introduction was always great.
Yeah.
And that flamboyant big start.
Yeah,
you know,
we're back, we're here.
This is it. So
that works,
it just was a fantastic way to start. And I think that can stay with you, it can carry through the next half hour.
Yes.
Back in the old days, we used to start with Watcher of the Skies, you know, with the moody Mellotron, Dry Ice, and Pete with the bat wings and fluorescent makeup. You know, that everyone thought you were great for at least half an hour before they realised that actually perhaps the music's not quite as good as they thought. So it's always good to start.
So it's all about audience trickery is what you're telling me.
Well, I think I was very conscious, and I've always been quite a big part of one of the contributions to Genesis was set order.
Sure.
And the one I was always most proud of was the one where we did Supper's Ready towards the end of the set. Well, we did it twice with things like we had I think it was In the Cage going to Afterglow, which was kind of the first build, then you went down again, and then I think we did Supper's Ready or something. Maybe at one stage we did this, and that ended, and you think that's got to be the end, but no, then you did I Know What I Like, and then you did Los Endos, and it just sort of, to me, that just was kind of multiple orgasm.
You build the momentum,
and you get it going. You know, so often I watch groups and I think, you know, you haven't thought about the set order at all yet. I know people want to hear your hit, and so you leave your hit until the encore, you know, and that gets you the encore and all the rest of it. But it's not great. I mean, there are some people who do great set orders as well. But I just sort of felt that was a strong part of Genesis always throughout our career.
Right. I thought that I enjoyed Bang's Statement. I thought Still was a really great kind of going back to using multiple singers so that each kind of song had a different flavor to it. And I think Water Out of Wine is one of the best songs on that album, maybe that in my mind, that you've written in your solo career.
In the dark, it seems so easy now. If you could just remember how the problem can be solved. The sun comes up, lightening the sky, but every day is the same. Doubts return and the answers to search you. Fragments fall around you, all shut down in flames. Suddenly now you know that it can never be the same. All of the hopes and dreams and promises you made have upped and gone, bringing bottom out of wonder, water out of wine.
Yeah, I mean, I rated it very highly too. It's I know the lyric works well with the music, and I thought she sang it beautifully as well. It's lovely working with a girl singer. You know, I've done it with Toya on Line of Symmetry, which was quite fun. You know, it was a rather ambitious song. And just proved, you know, what a range of voice she actually had, which had never really appeared on anything else she'd done. You know?
Stars ignite as the sun sets and disappears in a river of dancing molten gold. In the moonrise, the lion steps out tonight.
terrified working with her because she was a sort of out of the sort of punk world, you know. I thought she wouldn't want to do it. Oh yeah, that's great. And of course later on she ends up going up marrying Bob Fripp, which is quite hilarious really, because I'd never seen her in the prog world at all. But Janie Klimek, who I obviously used on those records, she had a very nice voice, a very nice soft voice. The only thing about Janie was she was not prepared to. I don't know if it's true with Toy to some extent too. They had no ability to improvise.
Okay.
You know, you get certain people. Obviously, Phil. I was so used with Phil and Pete and everything. We could do whatever the thing as with Nick Kershaw. You know, would do that, and you know, Jim Davidson. Of course, he was. You know, you couldn't stop him. He would just go everywhere. You know, and so I kind of got used to that. And so with these people, you're trying to get them so. You know, just do what occurs to you on those chords. You know,
right.
They struggled with that.
It wasn't their talent.
Not really, not their talent, but she had a lovely voice, I think, which worked really well on Water Out of Mine, which was done very soft and breathily, you know. And it was fun working with different singers. I thought it was, you know, Nick Kershaw I've been a fan of his music, I thought, and particularly I'd liked his album The Works, which was the one that preceded what I did. Track on that called Cowboys and Indians, which is just a great piece of music. It's fantastic, and marvelous chord changes and chorus, you know, and fantastic drumming too, which is why I went for Vinnie Colaiuta on that.
Sure. On
the strength of that, his work on Nick Kershaw's album, obviously, he's done lots of other things as well.
They're kissing babies and telling me lies. They're taking over my television. They're making noises that sound so wise, trying to influence my decision. Rituals old-fashioned with speeches so proud and passionate. Hope reigns physical. I may be crazy, but I'm not such a fool. No such fool. Red day on Blue Street, and this world promises everything. Old shoes on new feet again. Nothing changes. Red day on Blue Street.
It was, you know, I had the ability to work with all these different people. That's one of the fun things on solo albums, and I've really enjoyed making them all. I've always really thought they were great when I finished them, and then put them out and get very disappointed. So you can't each time think, I'm never going to do that again. I'm not going to do that again. No, and then I do it, and you know, my wife gives me the look. Oh God, you know, here we go again. And you know what's going to happen, really. But that's why 7 was such a surprise, really, because it actually went down pretty well.
Yeah. So, do you still write lyrics at all, or is it more you would do that if you had songs that you wanted to do?
Well, no. Actually, the one thing I have done recently, which probably most people won't know about, is I've worked with. I've written 3 or 4 pieces for a chap called John Potter, who's a sort of classical tenor. And he, what I did was I set some poems to music.
Okay.
A sort of 16th century chap, 17th century maybe, and also one piece by Shakespeare actually. Just on his request, he gave me the poems, the possibility, and I love doing that.
Sure.
And it's very easy too. And I thought this is what Elton John. That's why you can hammer them out so quickly. You're given a lyric.
Right.
It's amazing how quickly you can write a tune. So I wrote these pieces. They ended up on one of his the lute pieces. They're basically done with lute.
Okay.
A lute called 2 lutes and 2 singers and stuff. And I can always forget the title. It's some Italian title. But if you look for John Potter, and in fact the record did quite well. There was pieces on there. Also, he quite one for sort of trying to get people from different areas. And there were pieces there by John Paul Jones and a couple by Sting as well. And he's still got his 2 or 3 couple of pieces I've written, which he hasn't yet recorded, which I think they will do record at some point. But I found that a lot of fun. It's just totally different. Also, I love the fact I have no responsibility. Nothing to do with me. He sent, you know, when I heard the versions of them, they were quite different to a little different to what I'd anticipated. But hey, they still sounded good, and I thought it's fantastic. I don't care, you know. And from that point of view, I don't care.
Sure.
You do your arrangement. That's wonderful. If I ever want to do them myself, I could do them my way.
Right.
And I actually went to see him live, and that was lovely. He had sang one of the pieces, and it was it sounded really good actually. So it's that's an area maybe I could do a bit more of that. Writing my own lyrics, I don't know. I mean, I never quite know really. So the one thing in this world of digital, which is a kind of accounts for people, you know, this idea that Spotify counts as sales, whatever. I mean, this idea that streaming is somehow worth sales is the trouble is it's not a commitment. You don't go out there and buy a record. You stream. If you've got whatever you've paid your subscription, you're going to stream stuff. It tells you nothing about what people really like. I think.
Right.
Not in the way that the old days when you had to part with your hard-earned cash to buy something. So you get these very strange charts. Ed Sheeran with the 15 songs or something.
Right.
Which doesn't make any sense really at all. I don't think. And it doesn't. I'm not that I'm saying he's bad. He's good.
Sure.
It's just a matter of it does. I think anyhow in this digital world. I'm sorry, long-winded trying to.
Sure.
You could put out one piece.
Right.
And that appeals to me slightly more, rather than trying to make a sort of rock album or something. To do something on its own, which you could therefore possibly get some attention to. But I don't crave it really. I don't begrudge. I would love to have had more success with other records. Don't get me wrong, but I had such fantastic success with Genesis, which is far more than anybody dreams of. I'm never gonna. I don't really have any hard feelings about that. The rest of it. It was disappointing at the time, but I look back on it. I've done this stuff. And I love doing it, and I had the opportunity to do it. There was no way that I could have done sort of 8 or 9, how many solo albums I've done, if I hadn't had the success with Genesis. So it's given me that opportunity, and I do have certain people who like those things.
And it is a great body of work.
Yeah, I'm very happy with the body of work, and I think it's a good thing. So I'm happy with that.
Sure. What, the obvious question is your next orchestral album going to be called 4? But I won't ask that question. I'll just say, what's next? Or do you have
I got
plans?
a feeling, I don't know that I'll do another one or not. I really don't know. I didn't think I would do, I didn't think I'd do 6 or 5.
Sure.
I talked myself into 6 because when we were doing the tour, Genesis tour, they'd always ask people what you're doing, there's more Mike and the Mechanics, and the more solo albums. I thought, what are you doing? I thought, I'll do another classical album,
Sure.
So I taught myself into it, which I was very happy to do. And I wanted to do the 7 to put something out there that was kind of very close to what's in my head. Sort of done that now, and nothing's really led further.
Sure.
In a way, if it did. Then that might, I don't know. Each time I feel I'm starting from ground zero, which is probably the wrong term actually. We're starting from base,
Sure.
if you like. So you're not building on anything really. So it's kind of like I don't know that I've got the energy to do it or not really. I haven't written anything for about a year, apart from the pieces for John Potter, and I enjoyed doing that. And the idea of doing a bit more of that sort of quite appeals, but I don't know really. I've never really been one person to think ahead very much. Actually, even back in the old days, I never thought more than a few months ahead, if that. Actually, sometimes I'm thinking not further than a week ahead.
Right. Well, it means you're open to possibilities of whatever.
You're always open to possibilities. You never know what might happen, But it is. I quite enjoyed the sort of thing about the solo albums are an incredible responsibility. Back when I was with the group album, you used to have to take everything on yourself.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing anything, nothing's happening. It's as simple as that. So that is quite exciting and quite entertaining. And then when it came to the classical things initially, it was just so difficult because I was working in a world that I didn't understand. Most of the musicians in it were prejudiced against me anyhow because of where I came from, and no one had much time for me and stuff. So you had to get over all that, which I sort of managed to do with the next 2 records. And you find yourself in a comfortable situation with people that you do trust. And I found again with the great thing about the Prague orchestras, and I use different orchestras in them too, but they're totally different attitude to the British orchestra. Just that they were open for anything. There were a lot of fans of Genesis in the orchestra, and they were just very open in a way that. Whereas I found sometimes when I did 7, on a couple of pieces, some of the brass players were sort of would basically reading the paper in the middle of takes and stuff, while and then put it down and then go back. That lack of attention. I didn't like, I understand it really. And then I worked with the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra when I did the piece, the prelude, when I did it, the thing. And I mean, they were fine, but it was, again, not the same. There's quite a complicated flute part in the middle, which I said to them, look, this is tough. You're going to have to rehearse this. You won't play at sight readings, And we to make it slightly easier for them, we split it between 2 flutes. And when it came to the performance, they didn't do anything. I mean, they couldn't play it.
Right.
And that really annoyed me, And we'd done rehearsals and stuff, and I just thought this is not right. Whereas when we did in Prague, the flute player, I mean, we said this is quite tricky. Just make certain practice a little bit. First take, fantastic, and she got because we were doing the thing separately like this. applause from the rest of the woodwind players, because it's not an easy thing to play. It's easy to play on a keyboard, and I was doing fingers like this and stuff, like this. It's not much good on radio. Alternating the two fingers so you can play twice as fast.
Right.
And it was, so I love that really, and I just think the standard of players is great on England as well. And don't get me wrong, but it was lovely to have these players.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time, for coming out to, I say coming out here, but this is really your place.
This is actually easier for me.
Yes.
You're doing more coming out than me. I don't know. I hope you haven't come all the way from America.
No, not just for this. This was vacation
not
years.
Just for this?
Not well. Okay, it was just for this. Just for you. I came.
Anyway, I've
over
only had to come 2 or 3 miles down the road.
Yes.
So it's a lot easier for me. But no, it's great. Good to talk.
And we appreciate it. And just know that there are people out there who really appreciate the solo music you do.
I do understand that. And that's why it's great to have. I do have. I seem to get a great response from people, which is really nice. It's just a different mode of thinking to Invisible Touch, if you know what I mean.
It is so, but that's the great thing about it. There's a huge diversity of music within this world.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, when we did We Can't Dance, it almost seemed too easy in a way.
Right.
It got a little more difficult after that, obviously, but it was, with that, we had a golden period really from the 70s and 80s, and it was, wouldn't give up that for anything really.
Well, again, thank you very much, Tony. Appreciate you coming out here.
Thanks a lot.
So there you have it, the Tabletop Genesis interview with Tony Banks. Again, we have to thank tremendously both Tony for agreeing to do the interview, and which he did on a beautiful June Friday, which was a great day, and he sacrificed some of his time for that. And also, again, thanks to Joe Greenwood for setting this up. So any reflections from the tabletop?
I really liked how much you two talked about his orchestral work, because that's one aspect of his solo career that I'm really interested in, but haven't kind of gotten into that as much in terms of the context around it. The starting with 7 and going now down to 5, and that whole journey he's been on with this. So I liked hearing you talk in a little bit detail about that. Right. So that was good. And, I feel like now he has some closure on it. Did you get that sense that he's going to pursue this a little bit more, or
I was surprised when he said that he hadn't written anything since completing the material for 5. That really surprised me. So I do think that he viewed it as, okay, this I can kind of put to bed now, this piece of work, this working in the orchestral world. I mean, I think that if 5 were to go on to sell 1 million copies, maybe he'd think, oh, maybe I can do more of this, or there's people out there listening to it. But again, orchestral work is not something that's burning up the airwaves either, so I think there's...
Oh, you haven't been going to the clubs I've been going to.
I know. But he's had a level of success with that in some ways he never had with his rock albums. So he got decent reviews and things have sold decently. So I think that he's happy with having been able to do that.
Okay.
I mean, that's what I got. I mean, playing off of Stacey's kind of closure feeling, I kind of got the feeling that has a sense of peace and contentment with the work of his career. Whereas if you go back to some of his interviews, like in A History, another thing where it definitely comes across or maybe not intentionally, but a little bitter at not having had some of the success. You know, I remember there's that one time when he kind of has like that little sneer. He's like, you know, people may not have even heard of it, let alone heard it, and he seems kind of a little bit of, you know, it's kind of weighs on him. But the interview that, you know, we just listened to, he seems very happy with the output that Genesis did and the opportunity that it gave him to do things he wanted to do, like the orchestral stuff.
Exactly.
And he looks back on it, and I think he doesn't have that kind of air about him where he's, you know, oh, this should have been more popular or whatever. You're like, it is what it is. He's had some great moments, and I think he's really recognizing that now.
It's pretty obvious that he holds himself to a very high standard.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's almost like Genesis did this well, so I should have done better with my solo career. And I think he even said that he's like, I can't complain about having the career that I've had. You know, I've had this great success with Genesis and have been able to do that. And yeah, I think there's always that kind of, oh, I wish this could have been better received or more heard, you know. But that's I think he said, you know, that's where I'm at right now. So what are you going to complain about? You
The
know.
important thing is he did it, and it's
Yeah.
going to live forever.
Right.
So.
And I think I said, well, you know, there are a lot of people who really like this music that you've done. And he's like, I know.
Discovering
you know,
it new all the time.
Yeah.
You know?
And there are people who, you know, we were able to fill an hour interview talking to him about this. So I think that's.
I like that he was very passionate about these albums. Obviously, he, especially with the last three orchestral albums, he has very differing views, but he was very engaged with all three of these albums, and they, unto themselves, it makes up a trilogy of work, which is a very distinct body of work from anything any of the members of the band have done solo, really, at the end of the day. So in that respect, even in that one thing on its own, it's a remarkable body of work.
Yeah.
And I think if you haven't already explored 765, the feeling I got from it was that if you were going to start with ones, and maybe if you only wanted to get into one, it would be to start with 5. Because from what he said and what you had said from your listenings to it, it's the one that sounds more like his personality.
Right.
And it's kind of got like, if you're looking for a proggish type of song, you have the first one, which is 15 minutes, and it's a prelude to...
Prelude to a Million Years.
Yes, I mean, you can't get more, as he said, pretentious than that.
Right.
And that's kind of good. Like, it makes me want to go and explore this, especially now that he was able to do a track-by-track kind of rundown of what led him to write the different pieces and the different styles, and how he was a lot happier with this album than 6, which had the arranger, which might not have met his original...
Which I really liked 6 also, which 6 feels more like Tony Banks than 7 does. 7, while I liked pieces of it, he even said it sounds, you know, he said I don't want to put words in his mouth, but for me, listening to 7, it was a bit more generically orchestral. There are flashes of Tony Banks in there, whereas I think even the opening number on 6, I was like, this is Tony Banks writing this.
Well, you're still entitled to your opinion, aren't you?
Right, oh yeah, definitely. Well, I wanted to make sure I wasn't putting it out as he said this to me, and I was like, oh no, I don't want to put words in his mouth that way. But it was, I think that 5 is the best of them, and I actually listened to this album a lot going into this interview because I knew that we would talk about it for a good chunk of time. And it's one thing to talk about albums like Selling England or Lamb Lies Down or Invisible Touch or whatever that you've heard for the past 30 years. It's another thing for a relatively new album that doesn't have words, that's more about melody and arrangement, to be able to talk intelligently about that. Yeah. It's like, again, I don't want to be like, that's a really good tune, you know, and just leave it at that. It's like, oh, you know, this piece of this or that part of this track flowed nicely into the other pieces.
I think if there was one thing I would wished you to have asked him, which is if he'd have carried on with this series and it would have reached 0, would music explode?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it is
would he just put out a blank CD and say, this is my John Cage 433, this is my epic here? So
I have to say that it was really fascinating to hear how he approached a lot of the music, especially when it came to lyric writing, which is something I've never really heard him speak at any kind of length about.
Yeah, that was something that we asked Steve about that, we asked Ann Phillips about it. It's one of those areas that I'm just interested in because we think of these guys sometimes as the guitar player, the keyboard player, or the writer.
Yeah.
And don't necessarily ask about lyrics in particular because that is a piece of that. Like I said, I asked him...
It's an important piece of the narrative.
Right, exactly. And I did kind of ask about the competitive nature of it that he kind of dismissed. Which, again, I wonder if that's more with hindsight or when they were all the 18 and 20 years old, if there was a bit of competitiveness to it.
If it's going to be something like that, I would suspect that it's one of those ones which is a positive competitive
Yes.
edge. In the same way
Right.
that Lennon and McCartney would sort
Yes.
of like do that, and they would egg each other on to greater heights.
Right, like they wouldn't say, they might both come out with something with like a good idea, but I think one person would recognize if one idea was better than the other, that they should go with that, even if it wasn't their idea.
Sure.
So like they were all building something towards a greater good.
Yeah. And Genesis was, all kind of minor quibbles aside, a meritocracy. It was what's the best idea. And, I thought it was interesting that Tony basically said that Shepherd was the first complete lyric that he had. He kind of, I think, quickly said that maybe there were some things he and Ant did together on From Genesis to Revelation, but again, Tony also talks kind of quickly, so sometimes those things go by, and I'm like, did he just say that, or is that something else? In the moment of interviewing Tony Banks is a very interesting experience, because there are things that fly by, and you're like, oh, I should reference back to that, and then two other things come up that are interesting that I'm like, oh, we could just talk about these three things for 20 minutes, let alone, trying to get into other albums and all that. So, and I liked how he talked about writing for these, the John Potter.
I think it's John Potts.
Potts. I'm sorry. So we can edit that out. The I know we'll leave it in there. we even on the tabletop make mistakes. So, but talking about writing music to pre-existing lyrics, where he's like, oh, this is easy. I can do this. This is what Elton John did his entire career. This is like I just thought he really seemed like almost surprised for him how easy that was. Yeah. And it sounded like Stacey, you were talking about, is this kind of the end stage of things. But he did seem to be like responsive to, if there's something interesting that can go on, he would be responsive to that. Mm-hmm. But he's not hungering to do the next project, I don't think. Like we talked a bit about, if you were to record a really good rock song that you had an idea for, you'd probably just put that out online and, just kind of put it out into the world.
Because there's the capacity to do that.
Yeah, it's easier to do that rather than ramp up and do a full album when you really might only be excited about 3 tracks or whatever. So you can just kind of do that piece of it. So I think that I think we will see something else from Tony at some point in the future, but who knows what it'll be. So, and that's a very vague prediction. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, we also give you prop to bring up the This Is Love video, which if you haven't seen it, please YouTube it.
Maybe we can link to it on the website or on Facebook. So.
I think the moment the pivotal moment was when he is in the car driving a keyboard on the dash, playing its keyboard.
And remember, folks, never play keyboards and drive.
Yes, it's very dangerous.
I know. Sometimes someone will say, "Well, just one more song for the road."
Yes.
But that would just be a chord too far.
Yeah. It's one of Stacey's pinnacle Tony Banks solo moments. I think
absolutely.
That video. So.
It's on my running playlist.
It's a good song.
It's good. It's got a good beat.
But talk about somebody who does not look like they want to be in a video. That is that video on Tony Banks. So.
But this is one of the things.
80s gold.
Yes.
Yeah, this is one of the things I always like about Tony as a person. He does come across as being a very inflexible person at times, and like it's his way or the highway. But he does loads of things just to say, well, I've not done this before. Let's give it a go.
Right. Yeah.
That was something I observed in the interview too, which I thought was really interesting. Like he does, when he was describing, particularly working on the orchestral stuff, he's so prescriptive. Like play it like this. It reminded me of when we would hear Phil Collins talk about writing the horn parts for the Phoenix Horns. He would just sing it and say, "You need to play whatever I'm singing." And I think maybe Tony, I kind of interpret it as that he has that kind of approach.
Well, Phil had the line of "Leave your ideas at the door."
Right.
He's like, because it's my ideas that are on here for his solo work.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I was getting to was that he's very prescriptive. He has a vision. He wants to see it through. But I love, like, it came through in the interview times. He's just kind of like, but it is what it is, and we'll see what happens. He had that also feeling about it, particularly after it was released,
Right.
which I found very interesting. Like, I think he has a healthy balance of both.
Well, Tony was best in a group setting
Yeah.
in some ways, because other people, whether it was Peter or Phil, could kind of take that main promotional piece and really be out there advocating for the band. And Tony certainly did his part with Genesis, but when you're a solo act, you have to do that 100% yourself. And did that kind of mesh well with Tony's personality? Maybe, maybe not. So, and that could be, part of the reason why he wasn't as radio friendly as an interview as Phil is, or as Mike Rutherford is, or as Peter Gabriel is.
With every member of the band, and especially Tony Banks, it's always about the music, and that's all that's all you should have,
Right.
and that's frankly all I care about. But I know for him to reach a larger audience, it can't just be that.
Right.
And so it's unfortunate, but that's the way it kind of works now. It's how music's evolved.
Well, and as you said also, the music's there now. So, and, this is the type of thing where there are people who are really into Tony's solo material. And, I really enjoy it for the most part. I think, again, like any solo career, there's a couple duff tracks in there that I'm like, eh. But there's a lot of really good stuff there for people to hear. Especially, I think, for the rock listeners to hear this orchestral music by somebody who you like in a rock context. You can kind of listen to the orchestral music as if it's a rock arrangement.
I have a
And that
question
can be
about the orchestral stuff, which is was any of it ever performed live?
No. Actually, that's incorrect. The Prelude to a Million Years was the piece that he wrote for this festival in England that was played a couple years ago.
Yeah.
So he wasn't thrilled with the performance. I think they did a decent job with it, but it's one of those things where I think it did really inspire him to say, let's record the orchestra like a rock band now.
Yeah.
We record the woodwinds all together. We record the rhythm together. We record the violins all together.
The reason why I asked that, and I'm skirting around really what is my real question, which is just even if it was just one night of Tony Banks in one venue, here are my songs.
Yeah.
That would have been awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that sounds it's all pie in the sky, but just to have heard him play those songs live, I would have loved that.
Even if he did a mix of the orchestral stuff and then maybe just orchestral versions thrown in the mix of One for the Vine or Madman Moon, just kind
in the
of
same
like,
way that Peter Gabriel did with his solo
Right.
stuff.
Yeah. Well, Peter Gabriel already did it, so.
No, but I would have quite happily
Yeah.
sort of sat down and just
Yeah.
listened to a rock band playing his
Sure.
stuff,
Definitely, yeah.
And I know that there was that tribute night that they
Yes, back in the 90s, I think, or
Yeah.
early 2000s.
Strictly Banks.
Yeah,
Strictly
Strictly
Banks.
Banks.
It was like one night kind
Yeah.
of thing.
And I suspect that's probably the only live
For a lot of these
Bank-centric
tracks,
thing
yeah.
that's ever been done.
There's not a lot of. I was going to say there's not a lot of cover versions of Tony Banks material. I would reckon say I don't think I've ever heard a cover band do one of Tony's solo tracks.
Well, any musicians out there, there's a gap in the market. for
We're
you.
going to have our Tabletop Genesis band is going to be starting up, and we'll do these performances. Our
Murder
Banks
these
night.
performances.
Yes. So
I just have two things.
Sure.
Two other observations. One, I think Genesis could definitely kick U2's ass.
yes,
Yes.
Even though Tony.
we all know
seen
that.
that. I mean, let's just, I just had to
Goes
say it.
without saying.
And I absolutely love, I love that Tony strives to put together a Genesis set list that will deliver multiple orgasms. I appreciate that,
That's
Mr.
right.
Banks. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And believe me, you've delivered.
As we hope this podcast does for you listeners, gives you multiple.
Exactly.
Yes.
On that note.
Relax, have a cigarette.
Exactly. Listen to the interview again if you need to, because we do provide multiple copies to you. And this is Mike Lord.
This is Simon.
This is Stacy.
And this is Tom.
Thank you all again. Thank you to Tony. Thank you to Joe Greenwood. Again, thank you very much. And thank you all for listening.
And now the darkness and coldness freezes our illusion. Restores the big.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Tabletop Genesis. Archived episodes can be found at tabletopgenesis.com, along with updates, polls, and various other podcast-related news. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes to have the shows automatically and magically downloaded to your computer when we post new episodes. To keep up with all the Tabletop Genesis activity, follow us on Twitter at Genesis Tabletop. You can like us on Facebook by searching for Tabletop Genesis, and you can also email us directly at genesistabletop@gmail.com. Let us know what you think of the podcast, or send us questions we can address on future episodes.
Don't